Hi, I'm Sean Perrin, and you're listening to episode 151 of the Clarinet Podcast, the show for clarinetists. In today's episode, I'm pleased to be joined again by two more listeners. We have Richard Laine, who is actually from Sudbury, Ontario, Canada, so relatively close to home, even though that's about a 36 or 45-hour drive for me. I'm not sure exactly how long, but not necessarily close. But hey, Canada is a huge country. We discuss many music-related topics, but especially his love for the music of Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw. And next up, we actually go all the way around the world and turn upside down to chat with Stephen Shiels, who is from Australia. He's a longtime listener of the podcast who's actually recently started his own show called the Stephen Shiels Radio Show, and he just completed his Bachelor of Music program and is composing music, and we talk a lot about just various elements of music that he's interested in and working on currently. So before we get started today, I would like to thank our 77 Patreon backers. Thank you so much for making the show possible, and you can get access to ad-free versions of the podcast at clarinet.com/subscribe for as little as $1 per month. I'd also like to thank, of course, our sponsors. Imagine a reed that lets you focus on your music, lasts for months instead of days, and even saves you money in the long run. It's all possible with Leger Reeds, the world's leading synthetic reed brand made right here in Canada. The European cut reed is preferred by Leger artists all over the world, including Eddie Daniels, David Schifrin, Corrado Giuffretti, and many others. It offers a warm, clean sound with great ease of articulation and is now available for E-flat, B-flat, and bass clarinet. Learn more at your local music store or at leger.com. That's LEGERE.com. Take your playing to the next level with Bakun Musical Services. With 14-day trials, free shipping on eligible orders, and expert advice, you can be sure you're making the best choice for your musical needs. For Canadian customers, be sure to check out the new store that allows you to pay in Canadian dollars. And for everyone listening, I have an exclusive coupon that gives you 10% off your next purchase, whether it's a mouthpiece, a barrel, a bell, or even a custom clarinet. You can use code CLARINET at checkout at bakunmusical.com. That's code CLARINET at bakunmusical.com. So I'm here today on the podcast with Richard Laine, who is coming to us from Sudbury, Canada. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
So when did you discover the clarinet, and how long have you been playing, and what's your clarinet story?
Well, the clarinet story is that I'm closing in on 40 years myself, because I'm almost about to turn 50 in October, and I started when I was 12. Started lessons when I was 16. Had those for about. Oh, goodness, a good 16, 17 years, and then I just sort of been keeping myself going with membership in no strings attached community band here in Sudbury, and then and just basically pursuing it on my own. One thing that the main problem that I have these days is and I've never really quite combated the problem, is the rapid staccato tonguing. In rapid tempos, and when you have a lot of staccato notes in a row, that and just trying to increase my digital dexterity, and of course, hands and tongue and fingers are always so closely intertwined, and so I guess one just has to find ways to experiment.
Here's the next question for you. If I were to walk over to your music stand right now, what would I find? What are you working on?
What I would be working on is mostly the old perennials, the Weber and Mozart, and I've also discovered the two Majorcan pieces of Joseph Horowitz, and let's see, there's that, and I think too the really. I think what really sticks out in my memory are the three intermezzi by Charles Stanford. Mm-hmm. And Charles Stanford has his clarinet concerto, but I think that the really charming pieces, some of them are the miniatures. You know, it isn't always length that counts, and the three intermezzi for clarinet and piano that's one of my favorite pieces. You know, I've just sight read through it 2 or 3 times, and every time I play it, it just becomes more and more memorable. I really like it.
Well, I love how you're keeping up so much practicing and so much stuff that's not just the community band music. You know, a lot of times people get into those kind of bands and then all they end up playing is what they're doing there. But I also imagine, though, those are on hiatus right now because it's almost impossible to get together, of course.
Oh, right. Of course. And, yeah, I've always been lucky. I've been trying to amass a decent library of clarinet music for years, starting back in the late '80s, early '90s. So I'm doing just fine. And then I happened to get a real shot in the arm as far as building my collection was concerned, because one of our members had passed away, and then I got. It so happened that there was a lot of his clarinet music, which included not only solo stuff, but duos and trios and clarinet quartets and what have you. And so they thought, oh, we know who will benefit from this. So they passed on like 2 big boxes of, if you know what those bankers boxes are, eh? That you
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you know, I don't have any cause to complain that I don't have anything to practice, and yet I always am looking for other things, for other out of the way things, and once some of the places open, I imagine I'll get a few more pieces. So it's sort of like being a kid in a candy shop.
That's how I feel with my bookshelves. They keep getting bigger and bigger, and my time to read remains the same.
Yeah, well, your bookshelves, I take it, have not collapsed under their own weight.
Not yet. So if you could play any instrument other than the clarinet, which would it be and why?
For the sake of this question, I will assume that saxophone does not count, simply because saxophone is so similar in many ways to clarinet. But my go-to answer on that has got to be that I would like to be a violinist and a pianist.
Oh, really?
And why? It's simply because, you know, those are, if you ask me, the most demanding instruments that exist, you know, in terms of any kind of traditional instrument anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is that it seems so impossible to me that people manage to learn how to play the violin with because of the fact that it's not a fretted instrument. And of course, you watch some of these excellent players out there, and oh my goodness, the bowing techniques, the bowing techniques simply never fail to amaze me. And the piano, well, I mean, it's such a large palette of sounds and tonalities, and it's such a demanding instrument, you know, because of the subtlety involved. I mean, anybody can go over to the piano and just press down a bunch of keys and get a sound. But when you want subtlety and when you want dynamics, you really have to have that special touch of how you of your fingers on the keys. And of course, there's so much beautiful piano music out there. But one of the things that Goodman is doing very nicely, I find, is that it's doing a very good job of just helping people understand that, well, you know, there are so many beautiful instruments and so many compositions out there that should be heard. Let's just say that many people seem to equate classical music with the piano, you know, because they grew up with a piano in the home or whatever. But there is so much other music out there that deserves to be heard from all kinds of instruments, not only strings but the woodwinds too. And that is one of the services I find that Goodman has a great potential to do, and it already has been doing, but it needs to do more of that, because piano is not the be all and end all, although there's so much beautiful music.
If you could meet any musician in any time period, who would it be and why?
Well, that's a no-brainer, man.
Yeah?
It has to be Benny Goodman, because that man and his music have given me so much pleasure and so much joy over the years, as well as being the reason for which I play clarinet. That I've always regretted that I never had a chance to tell that great man just what his music means to me, and I guess that I'll put Artie Shaw in there too. I mean, he's sort of like number two for me because I'm a great swing music fan, and of course that sort of dates me. But at the same time, after having given Artie Shaw his due for because he was an amazing musician, I think that I would still like to talk to Benny Goodman even more, because Benny Goodman he always was so aware of his audience, that made him who he was, and supported him by into his music. So he never turned his back on swing and said, "Oh well, I'm tired of this. This has no interest for me." He always knew who his audiences were, and he was willing to play those pieces that he'd played so many thousands of times because they wanted to hear them. So that's what I respect about him, as well as the devotion to always stating the melody of a piece before he started improvising, and I think, and of course his improvisatory genius. I mean, how do you play those pieces so many times and yet always have something new to say? It never ceases to amaze me.
We went back in time to maybe meet the musician you'd want to meet, but if we could go back in time and meet your younger self, what advice would you give?
I would give myself the advice to relax,
Yeah.
Especially, like even now, I have to think so much of, I have to think so much about relaxing. Every time, the tempo gets fast, every time the articulation gets rapid, I still don't have that feeling mastered of having my feet firmly planted on the ground and just, mind over matter, and just like, okay, being able to tell myself, play mental games so that something doesn't seem so fast or whatever it is. I get carried away, and of course that means that proves that I love the music. But then when you start getting excited like that, you also tend to get tense, and of course tension is the antithesis of relaxation, and it's also it also means that you can't concentrate, and worst of all, tension spreads, and then you're just sunk.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wish that I could relax and going back to my younger self, because I still have my issues with it, and also just to be patient with myself. I mean, it's great to have big idols like Goodman and Shaw and all of these and all of these people, but it can be a bit of a problem when a person like myself has such high standards, and because I want to do everything well, as quickly as possible, and maybe even perfectly. I mean, maybe I got to get rid of that. Maybe I've got to get rid of this idea of being perfect. But I mean, that's how much I care about this stuff.
Yeah, it's like they say. I think the phrase is "perfect is the enemy of done" or something like that.
Oh, I hadn't heard of that, but well, it does kind of make sense, though, doesn't it? Because after all, if you think that you've got something absolutely perfect and done, then there's no need to go back to it. It's sort of like, well, you've done everything that you can with the Mozart concerto, or I don't know, with the Cavallini Caprices, or whatever you want to put in there in that blank. And then, if you think that you don't have anything to go back to and improve on, then that's kind of disappointing. It's kind of like everything's been said and done that can be said. It reminds me of Artie Shaw, actually, who said that the problem with he didn't like being pigeonholed, and then he said one of the problems with being defined is that that you're done for because you put yourself in a pigeonhole. That the problem with the word definition is that it implies that you've absolutely set the boundaries for what something can be, and then once you've defined something, then you're done with it, and then there's nothing more to be said. And he was just one of those people who was never satisfied, never thought he was done. But he also was the problem with him was he was just dissatisfied with himself because he never thought that he could do well enough. And so I think that was one of the big reasons why he gave up music and didn't touch the clarinet for the last 50 years of his life, from the age of 44 until the age of 94 when he died.
Wow.
It's not that he wasn't involved with some aspects of music, but he just didn't play, and I always thought that was so tragic, because that guy, I don't care what era you're talking about, nobody had a command of the extreme upper register of the clarinet like that man did.
Well, you should check out a book called The Practicing Mind. It actually talks about this whole phenomenon where, the reason perfection can never be reached is because the better you get, the farther you can see. It's like climbing up a pole or something. Your horizon keeps moving away where you get to. So you'll, even like Glenn Gould...
You climb, the farther you can see, and you think, oh my God, I just haven't got there, kind of thing.
Exactly. Or even like crossing the ocean. Like, it doesn't matter where you go, the horizon's always the same distance, right? So, I mean, it's kind of an endless pursuit. And the book just talks about kind of enjoying the process and trying to become part of the process and realizing that perfection is not attainable, because as soon as you get to that far place you're imagining, the horizon will still be that far.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. That there's always something more to do. And of course, and that's why it's good to sight read,
Totally.
and not worry about whether you get everything perfect. I mean, there are lots of studies. That's why it's good to go back and read simpler stuff read simpler stuff than what you usually do, just so that your eye can pass over it, and it's not overly complex, but you have the satisfaction of, well, I got through that, and my fingers did what they should do. I actually do use some simpler clarinet books as material more basic material that can be used for saxophone.
Mm-hmm.
And just taking the simpler music and transposing whatever parts are in the shallow register into the register above, so that I can play it on saxophone. It's a neat experience. Like there are some books of clarinet rambles and studies for the advancing clarinetist, the progressing clarinetist. Those are really good books to be used for saxophone as well.
Totally. Well, hey, Richard, I don't want to cut you off, but my phone, unfortunately, is about 3% here on the charge. So before we do get cut off, tell me one last question here. What would your number one book recommendation be to the clarinet audience?
I think that one of the best clarinet books out there, and believe me, I've got at least three different books, but if I had to pick one, it's a book simply called Clarinet, written by Jack Brymer, and Jack Brymer had been involved with the. I should actually go and get the book, but he was a very illustrious British clarinet player. He died at the age of 88 in 2003, and he had been chosen by Sir Thomas Beecham when one of those prominent English orchestras was founded in 1947, and Jack Brymer went on to record all of the wind instrument music of Mozart, Haydn, and J.C. Bach, the youngest son of Johann Sebastian Bach. Mm-hmm. And that book in particular has a great section on what makes the clarinet behave acoustically as it does. Why the clarinet does not play even partials, and all these in the overtone series and all of that. That's his most original contribution to clarinet literature as far as anything that I've seen is concerned. And there's also a great section of photos in there in that book about antique instruments. So he does a great job of tracing the history of the clarinet. So anyone who wants to know more about that should really consult that book, because he does an amazing job. And I just there's a section in there on mastering, on what it's like to be in the orchestra, and attacking material for that. How to go about learning orchestral excerpts and that kind of thing. It's a wonderful book. It's simply called Clarinet by Jack Breimer, and it's part of the Yehudi Menu and Music Guides. Basically, that series has a book on every instrument written by an illustrious player, and in that series, the Yehudi Menu and Music Guides, the book on clarinet is by Jack Breimer, and I think he's one of my favorite players. Of those who go back a little bit in time, because obviously now his recordings are historic. But
excellent. Well, thank you so much, and thanks so much for coming on the show. And I look forward to chatting with you soon. We'll keep in touch. So I'm here today with Stephen Shiels, who is another guest coming to us from Australia. There's been a few Australians on the show as listeners so far. So Stephen, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We've been meaning to get in touch and chat for a really long time, but I first wanted to ask, how did you find the podcast? How did you discover Clarinet?
I discovered Clarinet, Sean, through the Overcast podcast app. I was in my undergraduate degree about 3 years ago, and I was just curious to see if there was a clarinet podcast out there. Because I don't think many people could do it, and I found it, and I liked it. And you had Stanley Drucker and Daniel Spreadsbury from Dorico, and I was like, yeah, this is good.
So what's your favorite episode been so far?
It's been with Daniel Spreadsbury when he was introducing Dorico.
Oh, really? Great.
Composition software.
And so I see you're now using Dorico. You've, in fact, I was going to ask you a little bit about your recording and composing. You've since graduated, trying to become a bit of a composer and clarinetist and multifaceted musician. So could you tell me a bit about kind of what you're doing with music, and maybe a little bit about what using Dorico is like for those who never did try it?
Yeah, Dorico is amazing. It's much better than Sibelius or Finale, much easier to use. The instruction manual's so much more simple, better sound quality, easy to mix, and I think it's designed to think like a musician, Sean.
Yeah. I found that too when I first started using it. I haven't gotten very much into it, though, I must admit. I only used it a few times, and then my license lapsed or something, and I can't get it to work anymore, so I'll have to email them about that. But you're right. When you open up a window to make music in, for example, it just lets you start right away. There's none of this kind of fussing around, and you can do things like pick the key signature you want later instead of at the beginning. I mean, who knows what they're going to write before they write it, right?
It's brilliant software from Steinberg, and I really thank them, and their customer service is amazing.
It is amazing. One of the things I love about Dorico, and even back when Daniel worked at what's it called, Sibelius, he worked at Sibelius. Now Sibelius drives me up the wall. It's the craziest program ever. I used to joke that I'd break my escape key using Sibelius, because that's all it was about. It's like escape, and even in the manual it says, press escape 17 times to get back to the previous window. But even back then, Daniel would reply personally to these emails. I remember one time back in like 2007 or something, I used a different type of keyboard layout called the Dvorak layout, and none of the shortcuts were working for me. So I contacted them on Twitter, and within an hour, Daniel himself, I think he was the head of the design or something, he'd emailed me back a patch that I could custom install into my computer, and I thought that was pretty amazing customer support. So yeah, you're absolutely right. They're an absolutely wonderful company. And so tell me about a bit of the music you've been writing in that, though.
So with Dorico, I've been writing sort of like film music. That's like very sort of dramatic. I compose in like a atonal, so I don't compose with the key signature, and it's laid out in a film score. And when I'm composing, I'm always thinking of a scene where it would go in. I get inspiration from composers like Hans Zimmer. Well, who's the composer from Game of Thrones?
Yeah. I can't remember right now, but I know exactly who you mean.
People like Danny Elfman from the Batman. So those are my inspirations I get.
Very dramatic, thematic type music. I love the soundtrack to Inception, actually, the Hans Zimmer film. And the other one, Interstellar, I think it's called. Do you know that one?
Yes, I know that one.
Great movie. So you're writing music. You did a degree in clarinet since you started listening to the podcast. Did you do any composition kind of courses or study when you were there, or is this kind of a new thing you've come up with since you were in school?
The closest I came to composition, Sean, was I did orchestration classes.
Ah, yes.
I tried to compose 4 years ago, but it was a disaster. It was all I didn't know anything about harmony, and orchestration helped. I did some transcribing.
Yes.
That really improved a lot. And then I just found my way to write atonally. It just works for me, not having a key signature.
But for those who are doing anything, it's always good to kind of work backwards and do that. So yeah, you did send me a link to your CD project, so I'll have to check it out. I listened to a couple tracks, but I haven't got my way through the whole album yet. So that's a really great thing though that you've done there. So congratulations.
And thank you, Sean, and thank you for supporting me. I've got another album coming out today on SoundCloud, and then I'll be uploading to Spotify.
Oh wow, prolific. So have you tried to get together with anyone who makes films or like commercials or anything like that, if that's kind of your goal?
Yeah, I've been contacting some film producers in Sydney, some community orchestras, to see if they're open to playing any new music. 'Cause I think if the community orchestras are playing Beethoven too much, maybe they want to try something new. So I get in contact with conductors, and I'll keep going. That's what I do.
Where do you think, music is going and, the online world as far as all this strange situation we're living through right now? What do you think is going to change as far as your future goals, or do you think this will kind of just blow over?
No, look, I think all music will be going distribution. Unfortunately, that's where we are now. Not many people are willing to buy CDs. I know if elderly people may still use CDs, they will look at. Yeah, it's true. It's interesting. Even vinyl at times, but I think everything's going digital now.
Yes.
But there's still a market out there.
Well, the CD thing is crazy. I mean, I still listen to CDs sometimes. I'm not that elderly, but but you know what? I was cleaning my house the other day. I read that book about Marie Kondo or whatever it was, about tidying up and just kind of being more minimalist in your life and having less stuff. And one thing I realized that I have is hundreds of copies of my original CD, because one of the stipulations of the grant project that I did was to actually produce a certain number of physical copies. And, as would happen in 2016 with a clarinet and marimba album, it's not exactly going platinum. And those people, even those who supported the project on Kickstarter, they were supposed to get a CD, but some of these people, I'd email them and I'd say, hey, your CD's ready. And they would say, can you just send me a download code? And so even 4 years ago, people didn't want CDs, even 10 years ago. So yeah, I think the CD has finally lived its day, which in some ways is kind of sad, but I also don't know what to do with like the 340 CDs I have left.
And the reason why I say some elderly people may use CDs is because not all of them would know about streaming.
Yes.
You see where I'm coming from?
Well, and the quality is less on streaming, right?
Yes, that's correct.
There's something I miss about CDs too, and I mean, I can't remember how old you are, but I remember when I was younger, you'd go and you'd kind of spend your weekly earnings from your part-time job, and it was like $30 for a CD, and you're sort of invested in that CD. And I found that it would grow on me, and tracks that I didn't like at first I might like them later. They might be my favorites later. And you'd really kind of get a different sort of relationship with the artist than when you're at the gym skipping through Spotify and never really kind of settling down to listen to anything,
Have you gotten into vinyl?
I do. I have a record player, and I have to say it's an odd experience, though, because most vinyl these days comes in really high quality sort of audio versions. But then what that means is they're usually double or even triple LP sets. And so you find yourself getting up to change the vinyl over every 10 minutes. It's just kind of a frustrating, very different experience. So I have a lot of vinyl as a collector, but I can't say that I really listen to my music on vinyl all that much, unfortunately. You?
No, I never really got into vinyl, Sean. Always found it was, very big, carrying a big, what's that, disc or vinyl they call it?
Yeah, the LP or the record.
And then you have to get that what's that player they use, and then put the needle on it,
and the amp,
you have to change the vinyl over to the next CD or the next track. But I'm surprised, like in Sydney, there are some vinyl shops out there. People do buy vinyl.
Yeah, people are really into it now. I think it's a more sort of intimate, connected musical experience, allegedly. But I heard a funny meme one time. Someone said, oh, I'm so cool. I'm into vinyl because it's the most inconvenient way to listen to music. And it's not entirely wrong. I mean, it's thrown on a CD even these days is pretty amazing to think people used to have to do that. I mean, I remember too, being in high school and, you go to get in your car and you want to grab the favorite CD that you've been listening to, but, oh crap, you lost it. You literally lost your music. It's nowhere to be found, So you go to the store, you'd buy a new copy painfully with another $30 or whatever it was. Or you'd play it so much you'd scratch it up and your CDs would be ruined. And so
that's the downside. You remember, you would be around when cassette tape.
A little bit, yeah. Some of my first music was on cassette, and those would wear out horribly, and you'd have to use that pen to sort of fix them. So definitely a crazy, crazy time. So, well, we've only got a couple minutes left. I was going to ask you before we go, do you have anything you wanted to ask me or chat about just before we...
Yeah, I want to thank you for the Clarinet podcast. It's really good. I support it. I hope it grows. I want to see it grow in the future. Even one day you may be competing with Joe Rogan someday. How's that?
I hope so. Get Joe Rogan to pick up the clarinet and teach him a lesson.
Then you can have like 3-hour-long episodes. How's that?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that, and some of these podcasts, they are so huge. What's that other guy's name? Tim Ferriss, I think, has a really popular podcast. Probably him and Joe Rogan are probably the biggest ones, but Joe Rogan is almost like a video cast, though, isn't it?
Yeah, always on YouTube.
Yeah, he's got like crazy guests. I mean, he's the one who had Elon Musk on there and Bill Gates and all sorts of crazy people. It's nuts the kind of guests he gets on. So, but yeah, thanks so much, and I definitely wish you well during these crazy times. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Grab something good for lunch.
I will, Sean, and look forward to being a guest on your future show if you have any.
Absolutely. We'll chat again.
Thanks, Sean.
If you enjoyed today's show, please do be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And remember that you can get access to an ad-free extended version for as little as $1 per month at clarinet.com/subscribe. I'd like to thank our gold level Patreon backers who are helping support the show at the $10 a month or higher mark. We've got Robert W., Andrew M., April J., David S., Debbie A., Glenn K., Jason S., Josh N., Karen D., Miguel D., Patty S., William L., and that is all for now, but thank you so much to all of you who are supporting this show. Also, of course, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We've got Leger Reeds, and they now come with a really cool little reed case. It's actually not so little. Some people were commenting that it's kind of large, but hey, it actually fits all the reeds from the bass clarinet or even contrabass, I think, down to the E-flat clarinet in this one little recyclable case that they now come in. So you can check that out at your local music store or at legere.com, or actually at baccoonmusical.com. They're selling the Legere reeds now, and this actually does apply with the clarinet coupon that you can use at checkout. So you can save 10% on your next clarinet, mouthpiece, barrel bell, any accessory, even a Legere reed, which pairs really great with the Vocalese mouthpiece line at baccoonmusical.com by using code clarinet at checkout. That's code clarinet at baccoonmusical.com. Thanks so much for listening again, and I look forward to seeing you next time for a couple more listener lightning round or conversation episodes. I'm your host, Sean Perrin, signing off from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I look forward to seeing you back next time for more of the Clarinet Podcast, the show for clarinetists.